Why didn't mines stop the Allies in Normandy? Last year I did a video on why mines caused major problems for the Ukrainian counteroffensive. So why didn't German mines cause significant problems to the Normandy landings and or beyond? Some of the answers in this video might seem obvious, but quite many were surprising, at least for me. And this brings us already to the first point, namely the difference between a regular landmine in its natural habitat, the relatively peaceful and reliable ground, versus the treacherous, ever-changing beach. So a regular landmine you put idly under the ground and then it stays there for the most part. Because as I found out when I was interviewing a former German combat engineer that served in Ukraine, that mines can float or glide away, particularly during the mud periods. They also might tilt, which in some cases could make them rather ineffective depending on the fuse. Now for a beach, the situation is far more chaotic due to the tides. Although landmines generally are not light enough to swim, they are not heavy enough to keep in the ground when there's a tidal current. Nor is it possible in most cases to fix them on the ground. Some mines were fixed to obstacles, as Zaloga notes. Simpler anti-craft mines such as the Minenpfahl were created using conventional landmines such as the Teller anti-tank mine mounted on stakes along the shore. The schwimmende Balkenmine consists of several Teller mines strapped to a wooden raft that was held in place by a rope or a chain fastened to a concrete anchor. Keep in mind these were mostly intended to be anti-vehicle mines. Of course, there were also limitations due to the different terrain types. All of the D-Day beaches had obstacles installed, though some were more effectively blocked than others. For example, stretches of the beaches near Utah Beach proved unsuitable for many of these obstructions due to the tidal action that undermined or washed them. This complicated aspects further since there was no simple fix-it-all solution. Yet even if the tides could be overcome, there was another problem with mines and the sea, namely water, or better, salt water. While landmines can sustain a certain amount of water, they are generally cheap mass-produced products for one-time use. Which means when exposed to salt water, they generally corrode rather fast. The German army built their own improvised coastal mines and well, the performance of these improvised coastal mines was erratic due to the effect of water on submerged munitions not designed for submersion. As a result, the beaches were only mined to a limited degree. The minefields were generally located beyond the beaches as the tidal action tended to disrupt any planted on the beach itself. Now when it comes to the Normandy landings, we often miss the big picture, as you can see looking just at France. The area of the landing is not that big. Now if we zoom out a bit more, you can actually see that the area is quite small. Yet if we take one more step and look at the German occupied areas in May 1944, you actually notice that there was a lot of coastal area. As such, the Germans were not preparing to defend just Normandy, but from Norway to southern France. Let's do some simple math here. According to German wartime estimates from November 1943, Norway accounted for about 2,500 km or 1,550 miles, which was about the length of the Eastern Front at the time. Next in line is Denmark with a total length of about 700 km, which is about 435 miles. For the western parts of France and the Netherlands together, the frontage was about 2,100 km or 1,300 miles. Next is southern France. Length of the coast was about 500 km or 310 miles. In Italy, the Allies had already landed. The front length was about 150 km or 90 miles in November 1943 and the coastlines 1,600 km or 990 miles. The last region called Southeast by the Germans, technically the Balkan, the total coastal length including the Isles of Crete and Rhodes was 4,200 km or 2,610 miles. So let's just sum up the coastal areas. That is about 11,600 km or 7,200 miles in total. If we only take into account the Atlantic coastal area, it is down to about 5,300 km or 3,400 miles. Of course, not all of these areas were suitable for amphibious landings, but there was also the threat of air landings as well. Furthermore, these areas had to be occupied and defended somehow. To give just one example for Norway, which was rather unsuited for landings due to mostly mountainous terrain, In November 1943, a total of 380,000 men were located in Norway. 13 divisions were mostly assigned to coastal defense, and an additional 3 divisions, including 1 Panzer division, were assigned as response forces. So back to our topic, namely landmines. It is needless to say that covering such a large area with mines sufficiently is next to impossible. If you just look at the French coast and some historical numbers, we see the problem. Through the end of 1943, some 1.7 million mines had been laid in the belts along the French coast, and Rommel planned to expand this to 50 to 100 million mines. This did not prove feasible, as the rate of supply from Germany at the time was around 40,000 mines per month. But by the time of the invasion, some 4 million mines had been laid along the French coast. Due to the lack of regular mines, the Germans produced various improvised mines. As Zaloga notes, there were several 100,000 French naval gun projectiles in the arsenals that were converted into mines by fitting contact fuses. Some of the beaches lined with cliffs had improvised mines deployed, made from old French or German artillery projectiles. The Minengranaten were simply artillery rounds strung on the cliff with an impact fuse that would fall off and explode if disturbed. The Rollminen were a more deliberate weapon, consisting of a similar artillery round and impact fuse, but lashed to the cliff by a rope that had to be cut for the mine to fall and explode. Of course, one could employ fake minefields, as noted by the German planners, since those delayed enemy forces as well, which was an intended effect of minefields. It was not uncommon to mark minefields, not only to protect friendly troops and civilians, but also to the enemy to take a deep breath and contemplate his life. Keep in mind, mines are area denial weapons. Now with fake minefields, there were many problems. One major problem was simply moo! Chaos. Yes, chaos, to quote a report from Rommel in April 1944. In many places, plowing continues right up to the resistance nests on the coast and cattle graze on the meadows. This is sometimes the case in places where the dune strip is very thin and the coastal garrison is relatively weak. The very active enemy air reconnaissance will thus be able to give the enemy a clear picture of where there are no mines, because where there is plowing and cattle grazing, there are no mines. Mining of the coastal strip to a width of 800 to 1000 meters inland has not taken place in many places. This also shows another problem, namely that the Allies were in most cases well informed about German mines and obstacles, yet at the same time the German knowledge about Allied countermeasures was very limited. Which brings us to the Allied countermeasures, an important aspect that reduced the effectiveness of German mines in Normandy. One important aspect was Allied air superiority. While German supply operations had to be limited to nighttime, the Allied engineers did not have to worry about being strafed by German airplanes. Of course, there was still German artillery, but due to Allied spotter planes and other measures, it would be silenced rather shortly by Allied counter-battery fire. More often though, the enemy's failure was the result of Allied counter-bombardment measures. Benefiting from good air photography, sound ranging and other techniques, and above all from observation posts in good weather, the Allies could usually locate enemy batteries quite quickly, and plentiful medium and heavy artillery, not to mention ground fighter attack, delivering crushing weights of fire. Usually the appearance of light aircraft in the sky was enough to cause nearby German batteries to fall prudently silent. This ultimately provided the Allies also with time, since German counterattacks were unsuccessful, to quote a report from Rommel from June 11, 1944. Due to the extremely strong superiority of the enemy in the air, it has not been possible to bring up the 1st SS Panzer Corps, the Werferbrigade 7 and the 3rd Flak Corps. Furthermore, to bring the 2nd Fallschirmjägerkorps Meindl quickly into the area between Orne and Viry rivers. And to counterattack against the landed enemy is also not possible. Werferbrigade, Flak Corps and Meindl Corps are still on the march. 1st SS Panzer Corps is pressed into defense under hard fighting and is attacked on its west wing by superior tank units. While landmines are a severe threat to civilians in any circumstances, for an organized military force, landmines are an obstacle that needs to be cleared. But an obstacle that is not protected by enemy fire is mostly a nuisance, not a threat. Particularly if the enemy is prepared to deal with this problem, which brings us to the next point. Planning and preparation by the Allies. As previously mentioned, the Allies conducted regular recon operations and adapted their approaches based on these findings. Here are just a few examples from the official US Army history of the Second World War. The first one shows that these matters were discussed on the highest levels of the military. Aerial reconnaissance disclosed hedgehogs on the beach at Queenville, just north of Utah section of the Konzeption coast. Disturbed at this turn of events, General Eisenhower sent Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Davison, Jr. of General Moore's staff and Lieutenant Colonel John T. O'Neill, commander of the 5th Corps 112th Engineer Combat Battalion, to attend an obstacle demonstration at Fort Pierce in Florida between 9th and 11th February 1944. Units received additional training to deal with mines and obstacles. Brigade units, the 5th and 6th Engineer Special Brigades, received further training in mine work, Bailey Bridge construction, road maintenance and demolition upon arrival in Swansea on the south coast of Wales early in November 1943. By early January 1944, they were receiving training and landing operations nearby Oxwich Beach. And finally, specific training was conducted for individual beaches months prior to the invasion. Detailed planning for breaching the obstacles on D-Day began in the United Kingdom in mid-March 1944, when General Bradley directed 5th and 7th Corps to submit clearing plans for Omaha and Utah beaches by 1st April 1944. The Allies not only trained their engineers to clear mines, but they also built a lot of dedicated vehicles to deal with mines and obstacles, like the armored Funnies, generally better known as Hobart's Funnies. The British already in 1942 started to search for various solutions to overcome mines and obstacles, particularly based on their experiences with Rommel's minefields at El Alamein. This led to specialized vehicles like mine clearing tanks and more. In March 1943, the British Army decided to convert one of its armored divisions, the 79th, into an unorthodox division focused on the use of specialized tanks. It was not a standard combined arms division with the usual mix of tanks, infantry and artillery, but a pure tank force. Nor was it intended to be used as a conventional division en masse. Its component regiments would be doled out across the entire British Army to provide specialized armored support. Although the effectiveness of these tanks might sometimes be overstated, it clearly shows that the Allies spent a large amount of time, resources and manpower in dealing with mines and obstacles. Now it is important to note here that mines caused problems, particularly on the tactical level, combined with strong defenses like on Omaha Beach. By blocking exits from the beach with reinforced strongpoints and creating minefields on the cliffs, the Germans trapped the first waves of US troops in an exceptionally dangerous killing zone on the beach. Yet we are talking about the big picture here, so on a larger scale the German mines posed not a major problem, since in overall they could be dealt with, that they were not a problem that halted the Allied advance. Before we come to the conclusion, we also need to take a look at Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine is far more symmetric when it comes to the capabilities of the respective forces than in Normandy. Although the potential frontline in Ukraine is significant, both sides have better intelligence than the German forces had about the Allies. As Dr. Colonel Reisner recently noted in an interview on my second channel, there's a transparent battlefield. Yet probably most important, the force capabilities are quite different. For instance, in Ukraine no side has air superiority, let alone air supremacy. In terms of artillery there's discrepancy, but it is not as extensive as in Normandy, where the Allies brought about 80 destroyers, 20 cruisers and several battleships, which could provide far more firepower than the German coastal and field batteries. This allowed the Allies to clear mines and obstacles under relative security from the German firepower. Finally, the Allies also had far more manpower, specialists and equipment for clearing mines than the Ukrainian armed forces. To conclude, mines in Normandy did not stop the Allies or cause significant problems due to numerous reasons. First, the environmental situation made the use of mines in many areas not feasible, because it is very difficult to mine a beach due to currents and salt water. Second, the extensiveness of the coastal areas from Norway to southern France could not be covered by German mine production. Third, whereas nowadays mines can be rapidly deployed with artillery, rocket artillery and/or helicopters, this was not an option for the Germans. Fourth, Allied intelligence had good knowledge of German defensive measures and prepared accordingly, whereas German information about Allied countermeasures was very limited. Fifth, the Allies, due to air and fire superiority, could clear mines and obstacles that were beyond the beaches and under relative security, meaning not under constant threat by German attacks. This is not the case in Ukraine, where both sides are under constant threat by drone and artillery attacks near the front line. Big thank you to Budja Freimann for providing various insights about mines and countermeasures. Thank you to Andrew for reviewing the script. Thank you for watching and see you next time.